Larry Lala here. Just to answer your burning questions, which I guess I've left smoldering since about mid-June when I first asked you for these questions. Sorry about that. Instead of just typing some simple answers, I thought doing a video would be a little more helpful. So I'm going to answer three different emails that I thought were pretty representative of the questions that you have and actually contain the seeds of what I think are the most important issues to you. Here's one from Jack, who's headed to some law school in August. But his question boils down to this: what should I be doing to give me an edge over other students? I'm sure that this is kind of the bottom line for a lot of you who even have burning questions. You don't just want to study, you want to know what it is that'll help you do better than everyone else. So I think it's always helpful. I have some ideas on this, but I think it's helpful for you to understand where I'm coming from when I present you these ideas. I think it's helpful to start with an end game and work backwards. I'm a dad. Despite appearances, I'm not super tiger daddy. Um, and my younger daughter plays chess. And, I never really learned how to play it very well, but I learned to kind of set up all the pieces and start from the beginning. But I kind of later learned that what you really do with chess, what a good chess teacher does, is start with the end game. Start with something super simple, like king versus king and pawn, so that you know how the game ends. It doesn't matter how you start the game. What has to happen in the end is you win by getting checkmate over your opponent. So the question here is, what is the end game in law school? I think the right end game before we can work backwards to what we should be doing to kind of kick butt in law school is what are the skills I need to do well on the final exam? As many of you know, law school is about the final exam. You're kind of tortured in class. A lot of you have seen The Paper Chase or Soul Man, movies about what it's like to be in law school. But they rarely show what it's like having someone take a final exam. So what you need to focus on is what is it that you need for the final exam? And it's a little bit different, actually a lot different from college. The second question, as you think about studying, not just for what I'm about to tell you, but for any other advice that you hear, is what my professor tells me to do going to help me develop the skills I need to do well in the final exam? So what is it that you need to do well on a final exam? Well, I think exams are reasonably fair tests for future lawyers. I don't think the LSAT is. The LSAT's a bit random. Um, but a final law school exam is very much like an initial client interview. What you do is, what happens, in great detective movies is someone walks into your office and they tell you a story. And maybe they're emotional. And, and their question for you is, should I sue? Would I win? That's why people are coming to you to know if they're going to be sued or if they should sue. Is it worth the money to proceed with a lawsuit, or how can they defend themselves? So, what do you really need to answer a question like that? Um, One thing to note is that this is not very much at all like college exams, which tend to be focused on regurgitating information that you've retained during the year. You'll take a class on French history and you'll get a question about the causes of the French Revolution, and you'll have read a bunch of different people and they'll have different theories about what caused the French Revolution, and you can synthesize them, but basically you're spitting materials back. But this kind of exam, generally you'll get a story or fact pattern that you have never seen before, and you'll be asked to apply the law that you have learned during the year to that story. So what do you need to answer a question like, should I sue, would I win? Or ultimately, who would win in a legal fight? You need to have legal knowledge. which is in the form of black letter law. A lawsuit, a claim that one person brings against another, generally has elements or factors, and they tend to be pretty simple, like a battery. Someone punches you, you can usually sue them for battery, but you have to prove every single element of battery. Typically, the elements of battery include an intentional, offensive touching without consent. There are different formulations of that, but you got to hit all 4 points. So to know if you can sue, you need to know what the law is. You also need to do well on a final exam, practice answering these kinds of questions, analyzing issues that you know are there, and then actually spotting the issues, because very often when the client comes into your office, your client doesn't know the law. Similarly, on a final exam, with some exceptions, you're not going to be told this is the law that you need to apply. You need to remember which law would apply and then analyze it. Now, that's a lot more than simply playing match facts to the law. Sometimes there are absences of facts and you have to learn how to develop that. The last thing you need to do is to learn how to sell your argument to a judge. That's what things are like in court. You're arguing to a human being, not a law machine. And you have to learn what it's like to argue the law to someone where there's an objective element, which is the law, but there's a lot of subjectivity going on. Similarly, your professor is one of the first judges you will have on what's a very subjective exam that's only going to be judged by that professor. So I think there are kind of three strategies here, and I boil it down like this. First, you have to master the law. Then you have to master issue spotting. Then you have to master your professor. So you have to know the law, you have to know how to apply the law, and you have to know how to sell the law to your judge, in this case, your professor. Mastering the law has a bunch of elements to it. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I say a lot on this in other videos, and I'll say more as we continue to talk over the summer. But basically, you need to know what the elements and factors of different laws are. What are the components that will allow you to succeed on a claim? You spend a lot of time reading cases in law school, but sometimes the cases don't necessarily tell you what those factors or elements are very directly. A case contains all sorts of mixed up analysis and sometimes statements of the law and sometimes not. But mastering the law and so this is how you master the law. You pre-study or side study it using commercial outlines that just tell you what the law is. If that's confusing, I will talk about that in the future, or you can see some of my already existing videos online. Just look up pre-studying or side studying. That not only helps you with the ultimate skill, but it will help you with your classroom participation, which a lot of people are afraid of, and understanding cases. The next step is learning issue spotting. Now, this is something that you almost never talk about in school until the very end of the semester. And you're given very little guidance on what it's like to actually analyze a legal issue, meaning how do you collect facts and look at facts so that you know whether or not all of the elements are met on a given claim or they're not. So a starting point is IRAC, which is a really, really high-level framework for doing this kind of analysis. In my view, you would learn those at the beginning you would start to practice these skills, the application of IRAC, which is issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion, starting from the beginning of the semester. And you would ideally do this, there's this whole saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I don't know why that's true. I hate apples. But if you practice this skill by taking a hypo or an exam every day, it's not something that most other students do, but the ones who really know what they're doing do this. TEPIOD, take a practice exam a day. And then you should get feedback on these exams, because The practice helps, but knowing what you're doing wrong and fixing what you're doing wrong is even more important. Lastly, you need to really pay careful attention to what your professor says in class and the kind of language that they use. So this is kind of a pyramid. Sorry, going back a second, I do say a lot about this elsewhere. I don't want to go on at length. So to me, if you follow this strategy, you lay a foundation by mastering the law, you then spend a lot of time earlier than every other student mastering issue spotting, practicing that skill, and then mastering your professor so that you know how to sell arguments to your professor on a final exam. That combination of things and not doing other things that you're told, such as briefing cases, reading and rereading cases. I'm not telling you not to read the cases, but not to overly focus on them, not to spend too much time on your legal reasoning class. This is somewhat controversial advice, but if you follow this, you will get results.